Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast.
All right, so welcome to Faith Over Breakfast, everybody. I am sitting today with somebody different. Eric is actually out. I don't know why. He just told me he wasn't showing up today. So that's a mystery, but good thing I'm not alone. I've got a friend here. I've got Conley Owens. And so this is my first time meeting him, essentially in the Faith Over Breakfast format. We found out another pastor, author of a book, was in town, and I just said, "Hey, man, let's go to Alice's Cafe and get to know each other." Turns out I've read your book, so that works. And that's the concept of this podcast. It's two pastors sitting down having breakfast, and we haven't scripted this thing out. I don't know where it's going to go. He doesn't know where it's going to go. We're just meeting each other, and somehow we let you sit at the table with us. So thanks for hanging out. And so, Conley, thanks for being with me, man. It's good to meet you.
You're welcome. Yeah, how about that weather?
The weather. Wow. I mean, it's getting warm over here. I don't know about you. You're in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's always nice here.
Yeah, it is always nice there. Man, it's really nice here, except for starting about right now. And then it gets to be just a tad bit much. Yeah. So hey, so you wrote this book that I've read, and it's, I want to, this is all I know about you at the moment. It's called the Dorean Principle. Dorean or Dorean?
Dorean is how I pronounce it. Of course, if you were going to pronounce it using, a Erasmian Greek pronunciation, it'd be like Dorian, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I find it easiest just to say Dorean.
Yeah, we'll let it slide. And it's a biblical response to the commercialization of Christianity. So that's interesting. And but before we go into that, well, actually, no. Why don't you just lay down the principle of this book for us? What is this book about?
Yeah, well, let's start off by pointing out that a biblical response to the commercialization of Christianity. I think a lot of Christians realize that there's something wrong with religion being commercialized, and they can see that pretty clearly in a lot of the televangelists, a lot of the prosperity gospel preachers. But then it's not clear what distinguishes their practices from the practices of good teachers that are also engaged in a lot of commercialization. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out where that dividing line actually is, other than just, the ick factor, I don't like what this guy's teaching or something like that. Okay. Right. And so the principle, the Dorean principle, basically distinguishes between co-labor and reciprocity, where reciprocity is the gospel being exchanged for money or for something else, as though the minister is the source of the gospel and the one who you are obligated to give back to. Whereas co-labor, you're giving to the minister out of an obligation to God because you recognize that he is the source of the gospel. And this, I believe, is the distinction that several biblical authors make. You see this in Jesus and Paul and John. So just to give one example, and the word Dorean is the Greek adverb that means freely. Jesus and Paul both use it to talk about their teaching being free of charge, that they won't even accept anything in return for their preaching. Jesus says in Matthew 10:8, freely you received, freely give. In the next couple of verses, he says, a worker is worthy of his food. So you have those two things there. Yes, the worker is supposed to be supported, but you also have that the worker is not supposed to be charging for his ministry. So holding those two together, making sure the minister is supported by co-labor, but not by reciprocity. That's the basic principle.
Okay. So now though, just tell us about you. And I think one of the things that stood out, one of the immediate, as I had just read a little bit of your bio somewhere, and then I got the book, is I saw, I believe you're bivocational, right? And and I saw that and I went, okay, there's going to have to be a lot of nuance here to work this out, right? As you have another job and you're in Silicon Valley. It's an expensive place to live, from what I hear, or compared to Tucson, Arizona. So I thought, yeah, this has got to be interesting. So, but tell us about you and how, I guess first about just who you are, where you are, what you're up to, all that.
Sure. Yeah. I'm a pastor at Silicon Valley Reformed Baptist Church, and I'm also a software engineer at Google. And yeah, a lot of people come into the book thinking that because I'm bivocational, I'm going to be arguing that all ministers should be bivocational or something like that. Not the case at all. In fact, my church has a confession, the 1689 Second London Baptist Confession. In it, it says that pastors should be full-time. So I actually believe that in an ideal world, I would be full-time. It's just our church doesn't have the resources at the moment to make that happen. But Lord willing, should they, I would absolutely love to be in full-time ministry. A little more about me. I'm the father of 8 kids. 8 kids as of recently. If you get the book, on the back of the book, it says father of 7 kids. I've got 8 now.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, very cool. And no wonder your church, needs you to work at Google for a little bit. They got to grow a little to support those 8 kids. And
yeah.
Very cool. And then, okay, so tell us about your church. Tell us about, tell me about working at Google. I mean, what's it like to work at a church and Google?
Sure.
I'm super interested.
Yeah, so our church is, we're currently 30 members. A lot has been happening recently. It's an older church. It's been around since 1959, been through ups and downs. But the past 3 years, we've been praying a lot about the Great Commission, and God is starting to really answer those prayers. It's a really exciting time in the church, a lot of vitality, a lot of people coming into membership, and a lot more on the way. So I'm very excited about what the Lord is doing here. And this is really, I really consider this to be one of the most important mission fields in the world. Hopefully, every pastor considers their mission field an important one, but there are a lot of people leaving California for all kinds of good reasons. I'm staying here because I really believe in this mission field.
Yeah, they're all coming here, it turns out.
Hey, Arizona is a pretty good place.
It is.
So yeah, working at Google, I mean, it's it's not always the easiest place for a Christian, but it's not as hard as some people make it out to be. I mean, even people who work here a lot of times hide their faith more than I think they should. I think that if they opened up a little more, they'd be surprised at how open people are to talking. When you're a lot of the problems right now with so much division in the world and hostility are because people are communicating from afar. But when you're up close and personal with people, it's not so bad. So yeah, it hasn't been that bad. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's one of my arguments for bivocationalism is that exact thing that you just said. I feel like when a pastor knows that from intimate and regular experience, they have an easier time convincing their people of that.
Right.
And that's one of the benefits. So I'm bivocational as well. And one of the benefits for me has been that regular time in the lives of just the people of our city, and being able to kind of report back to our people, say, hey, people are okay with talking about what they believe, and they're curious. And even people who are really angry, if you give them some space and just listen to them, that goes a long way. And part of my bivocationalism sort of puts me in that space to know what I'm talking about,
Right.
without the pastor hat on, I guess.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of authenticity to that. One of the difficulties, though, is I haven't been in the office for 2.5 years or whatever it is. So
right,
my interactions aren't always are kind of rarely local at this point. But
wow, that's an interesting era of time, isn't it, to do such things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, another kind of interesting thing about being a Christian at Google is it's an interesting time in the world where corporations are growing, and a lot of I've heard people say that corporations are the new polis. Polis being the Greek word for city. That a lot of what Scripture says about cities and stuff could be applied to corporations at this point, because they are kind of like the society that a lot of people live and breathe in. And one of the things that's happening is as these different corporations are trying to support diversity, a lot of them are starting employee resource groups, not just for different ethnic backgrounds and stuff, but even for religious groups. And Google's one of the companies that's recently formed one of these. And so it's this interesting thing where, the Christian group that's existed there for a long time now has more formal of an identity, and there's challenges that come along with that, because now there's like some degree of budget and things like that, and it's but
it's got to be this very ecumenical group that all of a sudden now you have to decide what form of Christianity can we all practice or discuss together, right? It's the trouble I see in our Christian schools here in town, is all of a sudden it's a mashup of all the different denominations, and it's like, so what is the Bible teacher going to teach? This is
right.
It's
exactly.
Complicated. Yeah.
And so part of what I feel like my role so I'm in the steering committee for this group. Part of my role, I feel like, has been to guide people towards, we wrote our own little constitution and stuff, guide people towards structuring the authority structure so that the steering committee really doesn't do anything except for like establish the infrastructure to facilitate connections. We admin the mailing list. We make sure that budgets only get spent on things like social mixers or swag. But really let's let everything else happen organically. Let's let any formal speakers that are brought in. Let's let that just happen organically through the members of the group just doing these things grassroots, and that way you avoid having to worry about having any kind of top-down structure. Well, where maybe in 2 years, it's a totally different set of people who's running it, and they have a totally different opinion about what kind of speakers they want to bring in or that kind of thing.
Wow, that's an interesting thing to get to be a part of, and man, I don't know. I hate to root against you, like for your full-time pastor role, but as I'm hearing this, I'm like, wow, I'm really glad you're there. I won't pray for that or anything. I don't want to mess up your plan, but
well, what I'd really like to do, since I'm here in Silicon Valley, I'd love to be pastoring a bunch of people who are in similar situations and being able to kind of influence how they're influencing at a higher level. I think getting that experience and then being able to do that, I'd love to do that. And right now the church is small, but as it grows, maybe there'll be a lot of opportunities to direct people in that way.
Well, no matter if you end up full-time or not, having had this time of experience, whether this is something that you end up doing for a long time, or if you just reflect back on the experience, I'm sure it's going to prove very, very valuable as you guide other people. Yeah. Okay. So when I was thinking about, sitting down with you here, I thought there's a couple lines of thought I could go on. And one is I thought, so coming out of who you are, and your journey, why this topic of all topics, in the world, why this one? And I would love it. I would love to first know, is there anything just in your journey, in your life as a believer, that has there been a rock in your shoe for a while, and where did it come from? And put this in a relational context for us so we can see your heart in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a software engineer, I do a lot with open source software. If people don't know what open source software is, basically, a quick way of saying it is it's software that's free. But all other engineering disciplines, you're allowed to take things apart. You're allowed to open up the hood of your car and play with things and put things in, take things out. With software, if you do any of that, you end up making a copy in the process and you violate copyright law. So software engineering is just very different. And so in order for people to have that same kind of engineering experience, you have to apply a more liberal copyright license to your code in order that people can use it the way they want to. And there's just been a lot of development in the software world so that people realize that, locking down the code is not always the best way of making money. In fact, we can often get a lot more adoption of our products if we offer them freely and charge money elsewhere.
Okay.
So at Google, I was for a little while, I was the guy who would release Android as open source. I would push the code out. And I've worked on Chrome, which is another open source project. Now I'm working on open source at Google in general. And anyway, so I've had a lot of thoughts about open source software and how efficient it is. And because of that, looking at the way the church often deals with copyright, right, using it to the full force in order to secure revenue streams often. Yeah, that was the rock in my shoe, feeling like, boy, it seems like this is not conducive for advancing the gospel, especially when I've seen other people, use copyright in such a way that's looser, that promulgates, these products or whatever. Why can't we do that with the gospel? And so anyway, that was my concern. I didn't feel like I had any hard and fast, Bible verse that I could really apply to the issue. But then as I was studying scripture, leading a Bible study, and I started coming across more and more of these passages that talk about money and ministry, I realized, boy, there's really something here. There's really something that governs how ministries should be giving the gospel freely and not trying to lock it down in order to secure revenue streams.
Yeah. Interesting. So one of the other thoughts I was going to go after is I was going to say, okay, man, here, let's be real. You're implicating me in this book. Okay. So like I've got, and it's fun. I've written a couple of books, and they're not big sellers. These have been the biggest money drain of my career, if you will. But I didn't. That's not why I did it. One of them was it was a memoir about my relationship with my father that I wrote as part of the grieving process when he died. I wanted to write it and wasn't even sure if I would share it, and then I decided to, and I'm glad I did. And then the other one is about bivocational ministry. A friend of mine wanted to kind of write up some things together and put it out there, and that's the one that has sold a little bit more, and it's about ministry. So I'm reading through this, and I'm like, yeah, we got a copyright on that book. And so I was like, all right, so I'm getting critiqued here. This is good. This is healthy. So, but I was at first going to just say, so how do you have a conversation with somebody like me about that, who's already in the midst of it? But actually, as you're saying this, my thought went to, I don't even care about the copyright. I look at those books, I'm like, I don't care. Quote it, print pages of it, give it away. I don't care. It's like, but it seems like that's just what you do. Like, that's what,
right. I
don't know how else to do it, And,
I think that's exactly right. A lot of people see everybody else doing it and they just assume it's best practice.
Yeah, well, it feels like it's just part of what you stick at I'm really not too concerned of somebody stealing that property, because I put it out there, use it, talk about it, share it. It doesn't matter. I mean, but then there's the flip side of, you talked about the line, where's this line? And there's a flip side to where, like, well, yeah, I did put in a lot of effort to make this thing, and I don't make a lot of money. It'd be super cool if we even saw $50 a month off of my writing, which we don't. That would help my family out. Is that just me being pragmatic, or, where? And then with these two different types of books I wrote, the memoir, but it speaks about faith. And then you've got one that's about ministry. It's not the gospel. Like, as you think about those things and the lines and so on, how do you process that? When do you go, well, I think the principle applies to you, or no, you're good?
Right. Yeah. There's a lot to say about that. So there are a lot of gray areas, what counts as ministry, what doesn't count as ministry. I would guess that, a memoir, it doesn't count because, so it's
been way more effective for ministry, by the way, than the other book.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, but In and Out, if you know In and Out,
Yeah,
you all have In and Out in
we do.
in Arizona. All right. Yeah, so they've got like Bible verses on the bottom of their cups, right? Does that mean they have to sell the soft drink for free? Yeah. No,
Right.
I just the fact that you've decorated something with the gospel, right? Or you've given a memoir and couched it in gospel terms. Like that's not the same thing as the heart of what you're doing, presenting the gospel. Ideally, everything we do would be framed with the gospel in some sense, but that doesn't make the essence of a gospel ministry.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's helpful, because I would say like it could almost, if wrongly applied, discourage. They go, well, if I'm selling my book, I guess I can't talk about the gospel if I apply the principle. That'd be unfortunate.
Right.
If they were just telling their story or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Is this pushing people towards secularization of everything so that they can commercialize it? No, I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I had a couple little topics. I was like, so what about biblical scholarship? So you're doing work like scholarship work around texts, things like that. Is this gospel work, or is this just scholarship?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, if you're doing something on biblical archaeology or whatever,
right,
or ancient Near Eastern cultures. Wow, I don't know why I got so tongue-tied there, but yeah, those things aren't the gospel themselves, obviously. Right. But once you're presenting scripture, if you have a view of scripture that, and I don't know what your view of scripture would be, but you look at Luke 24, where Jesus explains to the disciples that all of scripture is about him. Yeah. 1 Corinthians 2, where Paul says he knew nothing among them except for Christ and him crucified. But in Acts 20, he says that he didn't hold back from sharing any of the counsel of God's word. So really, all of scripture, if you're teaching it rightly, should be pointing to the gospel. So anytime we're presenting scripture and that's the essence of what we're doing, I think it needs to be, that counts as gospel ministry.
So what I see a word biblical commentary behind your right ear,
sure.
So that, should have been a free book.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then what about I've got back behind me, I've got like a book on canon, text, and translation. It's, more theory of, about how the formation of canons and so on and so forth. It's about texts. It's not necessarily working out the gospel from texts. It's a work of scholarship. What about in there?
So let me go ahead and read the formal definition of the Dorean principle I give.
Yeah.
In the context of gospel proclamation, accepting support as anything other than an act of co-labor compromises the sincerity of ministry. A lot of these questions, I think, come down to are you sincerely ministering, right? Does this person consider what they're doing just scholarship, or do they consider it a ministry and want to assure everyone of their sincerity, that they really desire what is best for them and don't have an ulterior motive of wealth in this matter? Sure. So I think when it comes to the gray areas, that's what we have to ask ourselves is, are we doing this out of a sincere desire to minister, or is this a business? And, if someone decides that it's a business, well, yeah, that's fine in those gray areas, but don't call it a ministry and then charge for it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think, I'm thinking about, one of the Hebrew profs in Phoenix who did some work around this. And I go, could he put in his work to study these texts and translations without the funding? Like how necessary, and how much would we lose? I know that's pragmatism coming out, but these are the things I think about. How much of this great scholarship that we need would we lose if they weren't able to get paid for their work like that, and that's a tough thing to consider.
And that's what you asked earlier, what about, I put a lot of work into this, shouldn't I be taking care of my family? Yeah, absolutely. A worker is worthy of his wages. But if you consider in that context, both Luke 10 and Matthew 10, who is the employer? It's not the people they're being sent to. It's actually the Lord, who's the Lord of the harvest, sending workers out into the field. Yeah. And so I absolutely believe that, these people who are putting lots of work in should get paid for it. The question is just from where. And have we abandoned a lot of the structures that would allow them to be supported well? in favor of these commercial or reciprocal ones. So, for example,
So
you know,
then
a lot of these professors, you know, there's a lot of donors to the schools, and
Right.
you know, and some of it's happening through tuition where the student is paying directly for their education. But how would it really be such a radical change for them to shift more and more to being donor based until it was just completely donor based?
Yeah.
I imagine as people, if there is a desire for this work, there will be the money to make it happen.
Yeah. No, this is interesting because I've had a lot of thoughts around some similar things. So, but just to dial that in a little bit, you would say, okay, so the professor doing work who's writing the book about canon text and translation or something like that, he should be paid for his work, but it shouldn't be like selling the product of the biblical study. It would be that they would be connected to believers, potentially even ideally church bodies, that would say, we fund you for this work that you would then share freely, versus there's your job as professor and then there's your book sales on time. It's not that they can't produce the books. The ideal scenario here would be that they would produce the books, but they would be so well funded by believers in a more of a reciprocity more in the co-labor, sentiment, that they wouldn't need to also bank on book sales or, pad their living with book sales, depending on the situation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if a lot of churches recognize that this is part of the ministry of their church, this professor ministering in this school by teaching or by publishing, if they don't have the money to support him well, they can always get help. But I think a lot of times these churches would, if there were just a place for that kind of office.
So, and then so most of our listeners aren't pastors. They're, people within our church communities and kind of extended out. There's, I suppose, folks that we don't have a clue about who tune in, but they might think, okay, yeah, I'm not a pastor. This doesn't apply to me, but this could potentially apply to, making of music or other things that had like any time that what you would engage in and sell. Okay, let's have fun with this. There was a guy at the Pima County Fair out here. He was making wooden plaques with sayings on them. So somebody comes up and says, I want a Jeremiah 29:11 plaque. I want to put that up on my wall, and he carves it out, sells it to him for $50. Violated the principle or not?
Oh no, I don't think so. I mean,
No,
the
okay.
essence of what's being sold is decoration, and if you want to slap on a Bible verse, and then on top of that, there's the fact that it was commissioned work, right? So there's this, and that's what happens with preachers and missionaries. When people are supporting them, they're like, hey, we want you to go proclaim the gospel here. Here's some money to make it happen.
Yeah.
That's another element of what's happening there. So yeah, on multiple counts, I wouldn't see any of that as a problem.
I got sorry to pepper you, but this is what I would do
Sure.
to your breakfast, by the way. So
yeah.
I got invited to do a webinar to do some training for some leaders, and they said there's we'd like to pay you for this. Because it's being offered, it's through a church structure, good, or should I be like, no, my local body supports me already. I don't need to take that.
Yeah, so if you look through the book for where I talk about honorariums, I think that honorariums are perfectly fine when it's, once again, people co-laboring with you.
Yeah.
If you're presenting at a conference and where the funds are coming from are the people being charged at the door, that's reciprocity. But if it's, a church that wants to make sure that, this teaching happens, they want to work with you to make sure that their people are educated. There's nothing wrong with that honorariums is co-labor. And consider, that in 1 Timothy 5, honor is the word that's used
which is where we
speak
get
of.
that.
Yeah. So honorariums aren't inherently wrong. You mentioned music a second ago. I'd like to go ahead and answer that one directly. Yeah. So sure, some artists might have like Christian themes, but they're primarily entertainment. I don't think there's anything wrong there.
Kanye. Like take Kanye. Yeah.
Yeah, no, nothing wrong there, skillet or whatever. But worship music, designed for the people of God as they're gathering in formal worship to praise the Lord. I think it's just one of the worst witnesses to the world that, we've got those little CCLI numbers on the bottom of the projector screens, letting everyone know we paid our worship tax. Not a bad testimony from us, but a bad testimony to those who would claim to be ministering to the church and charge the church in that way, so that they are permitted by law to sing the songs they would like to sing.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I just don't like paying for things. So, the CCLI license was always just a thing where I was like, do we really have to do this? I hadn't thought about it as a bad witness, but I'm not disagreeing with you. I worked in a Christian bookstore when I was younger, and it was right at the time when like everybody started making worship albums instead of just albums. There was, for those younger than us, right? Like there was a day, there was a time. Yeah, the Wow albums. But there was a time when the music in the Christian stores wasn't primarily worship. In fact, like none of it was at first. And then like Hillsong probably kind of started something. And then eventually you had groups like Mercy Me and stuff, where the whole album started to feel kind of like a Third Day, who used to just be like a rock band. And now all of a sudden the whole album feels like a worship service to some degree. But before that, you had like Michael W. Smith, Steve Curtis Chapman, right, who were putting out albums. You're like, it's got some vague themes about God, but this is just, this is
not something you would sing together with other people.
No, it would be weird to sing Go West Young Man together in a group. Yeah. And so something changed in there. And I remember even as a young guy working at that situation, at first I thought, oh, whoa, yeah, these are pretty good. And then it started to just get a little nauseating, like the way that
it cranked out.
And there was like, I didn't look at it as bad witness at the time, but I remember just thinking it's cheapened worship. It's made it was a commodity all of a sudden. It was like, who's got the better worship album? And I kind of got tired of worship, as worship music got old at the time. And I wasn't thinking about it theologically. This is me, 17 to 19-year-old me, just going, I'm tired of worship, but there was something happening in that. And it was facilitated by it being treated as a commodity in a way, right?
Yeah. Well, those are some interesting thoughts.
Yeah. How did you process that time?
Yeah, I kind of enjoyed it, but I've never been very into music, so that's probably like part of why it was, not much on the radar. But yeah, as I became interested in copyright and copyright law, one of the first things I noticed was, CCLI, like, wow, we have to pay, essentially this worship tax.
Yeah.
In order to come together and worship. That just seems wrong that other Christians would do that to churches.
Right. Yeah.
If we want to support this, let's support it. But why would we do it in this way where we're essentially threatening to violate 1 Corinthians 6, don't take another brother to court.
Right.
Right.
Like, why would we do it? That's where it leads. If they really follow up on it, that's where it leads. Yeah. Interestingly, Eric, who would normally be sitting with us today, he does not pay a CCLI license because they only sing songs out of the public domain, or they write their own stuff.
That's and so cool.
He would be pitching in on this right now, going, "Well, I never did that anyway."
Oh, nice. I'd love to talk to him, because if more people get interested in this book, one of the first projects I'd like to do is to make a public domain hymnal. Not just, obviously there are public domain hymnals, but one that includes newer music as well.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. I think a lot of people would enjoy that. I think it's one of those things where it's almost, I saw a documentary on, like healthy yogurt or something. And they were saying that the unhealthy yogurt is just what everybody buys. And once people stop buying it, the healthy yogurt's going to come in. And in a way, I feel like if there were great songs available that people didn't have to do the CCLI license for,
right,
they would just stop,
Yeah, exactly.
They would stop using it because nobody likes it. I've never heard one leader go, you know what, I love that CCLI license. It's the best. I think it's a really great thing.
Yeah, you know what? One problem with this is the fact that it used to be the case that the people writing the songs were pastors and theologians.
Sure.
And now it's people who are not theologically trained. You see that in the quality of the lyrics, that it's pretty, it's not necessarily even Trinitarian half the time,
Well, it's coming from, and having worked at the bookstore, I know this, the Christian music companies are just owned by they're just subsets of the other music companies out there.
Right.
This is just this is Sony, BMG producing music for a market. It's just like when Netflix made the show about summer camp a week away. That was Netflix going, we want Christians to tune into Netflix. That, a lot of the Christian music, including the worship, was Sony saying, we see a market here, we want to sell to it. And then they labeled it under a Christian label to make people feel more comfortable, marketed it at Christian stores, but it wasn't coming from the church. Ultimately.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where I'm going with this is that think about the implications for fundraising. Well, if these things are coming from the church, either the pastor who's already paid or the congregation who has, they're pulling resources on a weekly basis, you don't have to get creative with, how do we make money off this thing? If instead, they're happening from these secular entities that are trying to compete, or they're happening from these, professional musicians who aren't operating as an arm of their church, you have to start getting creative and coming up with means like this. So if we could restore the authorship of worship music to being a higher thing, something that requires more of a theological effort, I think, we would see a lot of these problems become less sharp as we go on.
All right, so I'm gonna take a left turn here for a second, because I'm curious. So I have been working on a project which is interesting to me. So I've been trying to create essentially like an idea or small business incubator thing for Christians, but with a nuance that it would be people who were commissioned and sent and supported by their churches. We would come alongside the church and add in some principles of kind of entrepreneurship and growing your idea and building it out, and then hand them right back to their church. Or not even, when I say hand off and hand back, that's not even right. We want to make sure their churches know them, understand their idea, and we're just a support that comes back. And then we make sure that they stay under the care and guidance of their church the whole way. The reason for this is because I had to do some old Presbyterian history. And so I'm sorry, I'm not a Baptist. I'm just going to, putting those cards on the table.
I went to a Presbyterian seminary. It's all right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And so maybe you know this from your journeys. So back in the 1800s, there was a big discussion about mission boards and whether or not they should be attached and under the eldership of the church. And the arguers who said they should be attached were kind of viewed as a stick in the mud, and that they ended up forming these foreign mission boards. I look back at that, and then later on, the discussion started to happen about the seminaries in the 20s and with Machen and so on. But I saw that conversation in the 20s just having descended from the one in the 1800s it was a continuation of the same issue.
I hadn't considered that. That's interesting. Yeah.
So what I became curious about, but I saw the two sides of the issue. In the 1800s, I saw missionaries saying, yeah, but the eldership and the sessions and the presbyteries, they don't understand what we're working on very well. They don't understand the context of foreign missions. We don't feel this camaraderie in the room. We don't feel like they don't put enough emphasis into what we do. A missions board does. And when, but then the argument from, and this was dudes like Thornwell and stuff back in the 1800s was, yes, but then there will be a disconnect between the churches and the mission board. And I currently am part of a mission agency, and I feel the disconnect. It is real, and it's a problem. And it breaks down the money flow between the churches and the missionaries. The churches don't understand what the missionaries are doing, so they give less. I could almost guarantee it. And so I wonder if in so many ways we've taken, and this would be an industry, like in Christian music, it's this separate world. In writing and the work of the seminaries. Even the seminaries have in many ways come out from under churches. School, right. As I referenced before, it used to be, and I told this to the principal of our school, I said, I don't know how you guys would ever create a statement of faith for this school and know how to like teach or even navigate a political division, because there's no church that oversees this school. If there was a church that did, it's easy. You just say, it's the statement of faith of the church. That's what it is. You could come in and with a different view, but we're going to teach from this view.
Right.
So I wonder if it's that, if part of the like segmenting out of all these things has created the problem where now we're trying to fund all these different things separately and the church is disconnected. What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got all kinds of problems. You don't have spiritual leadership from elders. You don't have financial oversight from deacons. Right. You don't have the weekly gathering of the saints where, these things are funded. So yeah, I 100% agree that parachurch ministries in general have been the cause of a lot of this difficulty. And that's not to say that parachurch ministries are inherently wrong. It's just they introduce a lot of problems when it comes to particularly this issue of fundraising, because you already had a fundraising stream in the church. And once you separate from that, well, now you've got to get creative.
Well, and the flip side of that is that it is real and true that, Presbyterian, say if you were to take body of elders in the Presbyterian church, presbyteries or associations in your world actually often don't have their pulse on foreign missions or on how to produce great music or how to, you could check the list. So the flip side of it is that I think that separation was bad, but the longing that those people had to be in a space that understood them and could really, it was, I get that long. Actually, I felt that longing. And I feel like, I think we can come up with better creative solutions where we can add real community and support and camaraderie without detaching things from the church. I personally think we need to bring those things back toward each other with greater creativity and conviction. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. I'm curious about your the business incubator you're talking about. Why would, so mission boards, I understand, seminaries, I understand. Yeah. Why would you want businesses to be connected to the church? Is this coming from some kind of like eschatological perspective where, Christianity kind of takes over secular environments, or?
I wouldn't use the word takes over, but I would say that I do believe that like Christianity's presence in those environments is extremely valuable. Sure. And
no one can argue with that.
Yeah. And I would even say that like God, take old thoughts, and this is a Catholic thought, but like the Leaf by Niggle sort of idea by Tolkien, that like God really does like, take our work and infuse it into the new heavens and new earth somehow, which is why there's a city instead of a garden. And that I've got thoughts like that around these things. But
sorry, say that again so I'll be able to look this up. The Leaf, what was this?
Oh, Leaf by Niggle. Yeah, and this is Tolkien when he's despairing about his work. He writes, he has a dream, and he writes this story to himself essentially, to work out like how his imperfect work may be taken by God and even like beautified and perfected someday. which is, I see that, the New Jerusalem comes down, it just blows my mind that there's streets and gates and windows and we made those, in the image of God, God, the creative God made us and then commissioned us to go into the world and to develop it. Right. And then we made windows and gates and the new heavens that descend down are full of things we made. It blows my mind,
Yeah. I've done a little reading on this topic, and I have my own thoughts on where the limitations of that could lie. But I won't press them. But that's interesting. I'll look this up later.
And leaf by niggle, nobody I know in Protestantism would say this is 100% our thoughts, but sure. It inspires for a reason. There's a reason you go, oh, I hope some of that's true. But actually my inspiration for this incubator came from reading a biography on William Tyndall. So I'm reading about him, and there's a couple bios out there, and they're not we don't have a whole lot of information about him. So they're piecing things together and trying to kind of fill in the gaps. But one of the things that pops up over and over again are his printers. And they're not all named. One of them that I kind of keyed in on was Merton de Kaiser. And it hit me. I went, this guy, I look back on it. It takes me a second to go, hold on. This is a man with multiple printing presses. This is crazy. That's like being at Google, right? Like you've got the tech, you've got the high-end technology at your disposal, and he had capital to buy them. This has to be a wealthy person. And he is printing something that can get him executed. Right. And it's not all he does. He just prints in general, but on the side in the wee hours of the night, Tyndall is sneaking into his shop and they're printing out the English Bible. Right. And then distributing it, and he's putting his life on the line. Tyndall is a martyr, and he's accepting that potential fate. And I thought to myself, here's an entrepreneur with capital and on the cutting edge of technology who has been so well discipled that he is willing to die a martyr's death. I want more of that.
Yeah. And through his business too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so his business it's not explicitly Christian, but he is enabling and bolstering the work of the gospel through his presence in the economic system, through his presence in the technological world, all these things. So I, a longing I have is to see churches. I think at the time, the reason that he was that way was that the church deeply invested in him. And he probably deeply invested in it. And I think that a lot of times I see right now somebody, I'm looking at a picture of a guy. He comes and says, I want to go to another country to spread the gospel. And we're just like, great, here's money, go. That's awesome. And somebody comes to us and says, I want to create a new technology that I think is going to be a benefit to the community. And I actually think it's going to get me in the center of some great conversations. And we go, oh, well, let us know how that goes. Like, we don't take those people and say, let us disciple you more. Like, you're going into that space, let's invest in that. And then we've kind of created this little diagram. It's called the fuzzy line that talks about like business as normal, or business as usual, and business as mission, and kind of ask the question like, and so it's okay to just say, hey, I'm a landscaper because I need money to feed my children. That's okay. Right. That's fine. That's normal. But also, like, sometimes people have a deeper sense of calling in their work, where they would say, I really believe that I can instill gospel principles and show gospel paradigms, or like do direct work that like bolsters the work of the church through my work. And when they're saying that, I think we can add a little bit of extra help to say, like, let us help you flesh that idea out and move it more toward these kingdom principles, stuff like that. So
yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there. Yeah, man, I've got a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, me too. And I'm figuring out a lot of things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Anyway.
Yeah. One thing. One thing I run into a lot here is because, I don't know if you've ever seen clips from the show Silicon Valley, but
No.
one of the running jokes in it is that, all these different companies are saying, we're going to change the world. We're going to change the world. And everybody, so many people come out here and some even take less well-paying jobs because they think this one is going to be more impactful and change the world. And there are a lot of Christians who do have that deeper sense of calling. I think a lot of times very ill-placed in such a way where when, they end up working on something that's not as important, suddenly like they feel devastated. And, right. And it's,
sure.
You gotta have that reformed sense of vocation before you, by that, sorry, I mean like Luther's, the principles Luther was instilling before you, get too invested into these, other ideas where, it's only once you're working on, bringing water to starving children or increasing internet access in Siberia or,
No, I absolutely agree with you. And that's what makes doing this difficult, honestly, is because that's why I use that phrase like fuzzy line. It's not this like tight thing where it's like, well, as soon as you're serving the poor, it's missional.
Right.
That's not true, right? Yeah. Because if you make really great bread, like you're a baker and you make incredible bread and you do it well and you do it with a grateful heart. Like this is a worshipful piece of work that really does I think it glorifies the maker of all things when you make bread very well. So yeah,
amen. Yeah, one time I was on a podcast, this very long time ago before I wrote the book, and at the end, after we were done recording, this person who had a particular eschatological perspective told me, now go and become the CEO of Google. And it really got to me because I don't really, I haven't risen up the ladder very quickly, in part because I'm so invested in my church, and I've got my time split. It's like I don't think that the fact that I'm not the most excellent of engineers is distracts from my walk as a Christian. But no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey man, that's I've kept you on here for quite a while, and because you have a job and so do I, probably better call it a conversation.
Sure. Hey, let me add one more thought I meant to throw in there while you were talking about this printer for Tyndale. That's so part of what I discovered in a lot of my research is that this is how printing used to work. It used to be, you had an author who really wanted to get their idea out there, and maybe they wrote a dedication in the front, and when they dedicated to the queen would then fund their work or whatever. But generally, it was a secular printer who decided what was going to be most profitable for them to print, and there was no royalty system. It wasn't until the mid 18th century that you have some kind of royalty system come around. So for those who are wondering, well, how are things done before? Like, haven't Christians been selling books forever? No, not really. It wasn't until the middle of the 18th century. Prior to that, people weren't, the authors were not making money directly off of books.
And from reading about Tyndale, you don't get that sense at all that is a motive or a reality for him. That the printer did.
right.
Yeah, but not him. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you have these secular businesses who are, or maybe religiously motivated secular businesses, that are doing this work. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, in De Keyser, what I saw was his willingness to do something so dangerous must have spoken to his belief in the work, but we honestly don't know enough about him to know for sure what his motive was. But yeah, right. You don't get the sense that Tyndale is like, I've printed a lot of Bibles, I'm doing quite well. No, he's doing it as a sense of like, I must, there's a burning in my bones. The Bible must be shared. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, hey man, thanks for coming on. It was good to meet you. And the book is the Dorean Principle. And actually I found it really interesting, man. I thought to myself, I said, this is a topic I haven't seen explored, and you did a good job. I think it was really well done and thorough, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of other people asking you a ton of questions like I have, and you'll probably even find imperfections in it. But all that aside, you did good work. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for inviting me here to this restaurant. The service was a little poor, but
yeah, I know we didn't get a coffee refill one time, did we?
Yeah, no, we didn't. Still waiting on my eggs.
Yeah, well, maybe next time if you come to Tucson, we'll see if we can get it done right.
All right, sounds good.
All right, man. Well, I'm gonna end the recording right here.
You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.